We're here today with Harry Moreland, who was born on January 20th, 1924. He was in the Army Air Corps prior to it becoming the Air Force. His highest rank he achieved was colonel. We are currently today at the Fairhope Library in Fairhope, Alabama. And my name is Phillip Norris, and I'm conducting the interview for the Veterans History Project here on March 1st, 2011 in Fairhope, Alabama. Harry, where were you born?
Mobile.
Mobile. And did you have, what did your parents do for a living?
My father was a West Point graduate, and he was in the engineering branch of the service.
Was he in the Army for very long?
He was in the Army for 24 years,
24.
And he developed epilepsy, and he had to retire.
Okay. And number of siblings and genders?
I have 5 children, and my wife has 3, so we have 8 total.
Okay. And brothers and sisters?
I have 5 brothers. I have, they're a brother and a sister.
Brother and a sister.
My
Okay.
sister's deceased.
Okay. Before you entered the service, what were you doing?
I was going to college at the University of Minnesota.
Really? How'd you get to Minnesota from Alabama?
My father was a district engineer up there.
Okay. And you said your father was in the military.
Yes. He was in charge of the Alacan Highway.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. When did you enter service?
It was about March 1942 or 3.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember exactly.
Okay. And where were you when you entered?
Mobile.
Okay. And why did you choose the Army Air Corps?
Because my father was in the Army, and I wanted to be a pilot.
Okay. Did they immediately take you into the Air Corps?
I took both the Navy aviation exam and the Army aviation exam, and since my father was in the Army, I went in the Army. I passed them both.
Oh, okay. So you got to choose.
Yeah.
The war was in progress when you joined?
Yes, it was. I was only 17 when the war started, and I waited until I was 18 to sign up.
Okay. As soon as you were 18? Tell us a bit about the early days of training and when you went to training.
Okay. At first, I reported to Maxwell Air Force, and there I took various tests and exams to determine whether I was going to be a pilot, a navigator, or a bombardier. And fortunately, I made it through the pilot part of the program. And from there, they sent me to Jackson, Tennessee, where I flew Stearmans for a while. It's the first time I've been in an airplane. And my instructor used to yell and scream at me. We didn't have radios then. We talked over a tube. And I thought, man, I'm washing out. But every now and then they put another instructor in to see how well we were doing. And the guy said, he's my roommate, you're doing great, don't worry about it. So I went through there, and then I went to basic at Newport, Arkansas. That was the world's end. And I was there for, I think each program lasted 2 months. Then I went from there to Marianna, Florida, and flew. And they briefed us there, there's a bridge across the Chattahoochee. Don't fly under that bridge. And then they said, if you do fly under it, fly from north to south.
Did you fly under?
Yes, of course, we all did. And then from there, I got my wings, and I came back to Mobile. And a friend of the family's, whose husband used to be at Tallahassee, told me when I was going to Tallahassee to be sure and call on the governor. So I got my dress uniform when I went to knock on his door, and I got chicken. I got back and went back to the base. About a week later, a sergeant came in and said, the base commander wants to see you. So I went up and saluted. He said, I want you to meet Governor Holland. The man said, young man, why didn't you come call on me like Mrs. Weiss asked you to? I said, Governor, I got up your front door and I got chicken. Well, he said, what are you doing Friday night? I said, not a thing. He said, well, I have my daughter pick you up. And next thing, at 6 o'clock, the next thing I know on Friday night, a big, long limousine drives up with a #1 license plate on it, that beautiful girl driving it. And so I got in the car and all my roommates were looking, couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, I went to the governor's house. I have never been treated nicer by any bunch of people in all my life. It was like their son. And they used to come every weekend and pick me up while I was there. And even when I got stationed at Perry, Florida, that's where I trained in a P-47. And they'd come down on the weekends and pick me up, their chauffeur. And then from there, from Perry, Florida, I went up to Newport News and shipped out to Europe. And we landed in Italy, and then we got on an English ship and we shipped to Italy. And we were sent to a replacement center just under Mount Vesuvius near Naples. And I got sent to the 27th Fighter Group. There were 12 of us that went. When I went there, we were greeted by the group commander. We didn't have wings in those days. And he said, I want you to look at the guy next to you. We looked, we couldn't figure out. He said, one of you is not going to get back. Well, we kind of took that as a grain of salt. But I ran into a friend of mine named Aubrey Turner from Mississippi, and I had supper with him that night, buckled him into his airplane, and he never came back. So it began to take hold. They had P-40s at that time. They'd gotten them from the 99th Squadron, but I'd trained in a P-51. I'd flown a 40 a little bit in training. So they got P-47s right away. And of course, we're the new sports, but we had all the experience in the airplane. On my first mission I flew, we bombed a town called Panadera. We were fighter bomber pilots. I'll explain that in a minute. And one of us didn't come back. So it's beginning to hit home pretty hard. To sum it all up, at the end of the war, 6 of us didn't come back and 6 of us did.
He got it right.
Yeah, he got it right on the head. But let me explain the difference now between pilots.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 kinds, really there are more than 2 kinds, but there are 2 kinds of combat pilots. Those that live in barracks, bathe, have a mess hall, and have a place to go to the bathroom. And then the other kind that lives in, these never move, they stay there the whole time. They escorted our bombers over Europe. The next kind was, we actually call them fighter bomber pilots. We lived in tents. We took bath in the helmet. We had outdoor latrines, and we moved about every 2 months. And I'll tell you, living in a tent when it's 0, it's not very comfortable.
The pilots were not treated with kid gloves then.
No. And my first station after I got selected was Anzio Beach. And they had just come in there. And we were very restricted where we could walk because it was mined all over the place. And after Anzio, we moved to Rome. And then from Rome, we moved up north, and then we moved to Corsica. And we flew out of Corsica for, about a month. And I did take a ride with the Navy one time. They had these PT boats, and they'd get in the boat at night and go in the harbor in Italy and launch their weapons and come out. But they'd go in, just barely moving along, until the searchlights came on, and they were looking for them. And then, boy, they went full speed and dropped the bombs and came out.
Where was when you arrived in Italy? Where was the forward progress of American troops?
Just north of Anzio.
Just north of Anzio.
Yeah. We stayed behind the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
We moved up to Rome, and Rome was a free city. They didn't mess with it. We didn't bomb it, they didn't bomb it. But we just kept jumping forward every time they moved. Mm-hmm. And during the invasion of southern France, we covered that invasion from the air, and I got shot down, landed on the beach. Actually, I landed on PSP, Pierce Steel Planking, that the RAF had put down. And they repaired my airplane, and I flew back to Italy,
Yep.
back to Corsica.
Were you shot down in air-to-air or from flak?
Air-to-air, flak.
Mm-hmm.
No air-to-air ever got me.
Oh, okay.
Always flak.
Always flak.
Yeah.
And where were you when you were? I know you were shot down many times in your career, but where were you when you were shot down the first time?
Over the beach of South France.
Okay. Were you surprised?
No.
Right. And what damage did it do to your aircraft?
Very little. They actually clipped a cable that controlled my throttle,
Mm-hmm.
and I had no power, so I had to spin in and land.
You immediately landed then?
Yeah. And they fixed that cable, and I flew back to Italy. Back to Corsica.
How long were you down?
Not long. We moved up into southern France,
Uh-huh.
and the Germans were on total route going north,
Mm-hmm.
that we'd come in. And we flew out of I can't remember the base, but it used to be the French training base. For once we lived in a barracks, a short period of time. And we would go up, no night flying. We missed the boat. We didn't do that in those days. But the Germans were going all the way up this highway up north, and we'd get up every morning and strafe them. And we lost a lot of airplanes there. No pilots. They all ditched their airplanes. The Germans were too busy to pick them up. They were headed north.
Really?
Yeah. Then we moved from southern France into a town called base called Loyette. And from there we started flying combat north, sometimes into southern Germany.
Your typical day, what was that like?
First thing we'd do, we'd wake up, and one guy'd go to the mess hall and see if there's anything good to eat. And if he would, he'd come back and wake the rest of us up, and we'd go back. I really don't know what a typical day is.
Right. You would fly during the day?
Oh, yeah.
And
Not every day, but most every day.
What was your typical takeoff time?
It varied.
Okay.
It really did. I preferred the early mornings, and I'll get around to that
Okay.
in a minute. From Loyette, we met, I went north and was flying, and I had to make an emergency landing and landed. And when I landed in this dirt strip, the airplane tipped over this way and ruined the prop. So I hitchhiked back to my home base and got a crew to come up and put on a new prop, which they did. Right after they put it on, an ME-109 came over and strafed my airplane. So I went back to Loyette without an airplane. And the group commander wasn't very happy with me.
For losing your aircraft?
Yeah, but then they moved back to Italy, and we started flying combat out of Italy. And our job was to keep the Brenner Pass blocked. And we'd go up there and bomb the Brenner Pass, dive bombing. And the Germans had spare track all along the way. So if we bomb it, they'd come down and repair it. We'd go back and bomb it and come down and repair it.
For how long did you bomb the pass?
I'd say a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we moved from where we were, Tarquini, to Pontedera. Pontedera is the first place we bombed. And when I finished my tour, I was at Pontedera. And I came home for 30 days. Then I went back to join up with the unit, and I went back to Italy, and they'd gone back to France.
How long was your tour, the first one?
It went from March to January.
Were there a required number of missions?
100.
Okay.
I flew 102 and went back, then volunteered to come back. When I got back, we were flying out of Nancy in France. I joined up with them. And we started operating always in Germany after that. In the first tour, I never saw a German airplane airborne.
Really?
Really. In Italy. When we got back to Germany, you started running into that. We were at Nancy for a while, and I got shot down again. And when I was strafing the flak train, and he hit me, and I managed to get far enough back to land a little cub strip in front. And I got out of my airplane. I was met by a general, and I saluted and said, "Lieutenant Moreland, sir." He said, "Are you any kin to Johnny Moreland?" I said, "Yes, sir, that's my father." He said, "Come with me, son." He's my classmate. So he took me, and they got me back to our base at Biblis. And Biblis was the first base, Air Force base, Army Air Corps base in Germany. And we flew off a PSP, pure steel planking, and lived in the woods. And we were always a little bit reluctant in the woods, you know, how the Germans were going to feel, but we never saw them. And we started getting very productive in our missions. And I'll mention one to you, which is probably the most fruitful fighter mission in the war. And 8 of us took off at pre-dawn. Remember I said I left early? And we were going to look for trains. And there, when the weather was calm, you could see the smoke coming out of the trains for miles. We saw one coming out of, and I forgot the name of the town, I think it was Nuremberg. And 8 of us went down and strafed it. You'd take 8 fighters with 8 machine guns, that just blows that train away.
Because you carry munitions.
Yeah. And from there we turned north on a highway, and we followed the highway up to a town called Bayreuth. I spotted 2 armored vehicles below a hill in Bayreuth. So just 2 of us went down and strafed him. And after I finished strafing him, an enemy 109 went over my head with his gear down. Well, I nailed him. And I couldn't believe what I saw. We were over a dirt airfield that had airplanes parked all over, everywhere. So I took the airplanes away from the field, quite a ways away from the field, because my boss, who was very strict, said, "You make one pass at an airdrome. After that, they're ready for you." So I figured, oh hell. I saw all those targets, so I took them all away for about 30 minutes. And then we split up, and 4 of us came in high, and 4 of us came in low. And the high guys were there just to attract the anti-aircraft fire. And the low guys were briefed, don't shoot any airplanes, shoot up their guns. Well, they did that. After that, we had a picnic. Not a one of us got hit. We hit so many airplanes that on the way back to the base, I called ahead and said, "Get 8 more ready and come." They went back. Well, after the war was over, we went over there and counted 112 enemy airplanes destroyed without a single one of us.
Wow. It was well hidden, the
Well, it
air
was
dock.
all under camouflage.
Right.
But when we went down the strait, you're right down there at the level and you could see all the airplanes.
Right.
I got 12 myself.
Really?
Yeah,
All sitting parked on the ground.
yeah.
Now, would they,
Not on the runway, around
Right,
the runway.
right.
Yeah, right.
they would explode? They were full of gas. And,
Yeah. Now, I figured all in all, when I was in Europe, I destroyed 25 airplanes. But when you shoot them on the ground, you don't get credit for that. You have to shoot them out of the air. So nothing was said of that.
Now, you did see airplanes in Germany in the air.
I contacted, I shot up ME-163 before you got to land. That's a prop, it's like a rocket airplane that flew. They just took off, bombed, and then came back, not bombed, but straight the airplanes. And I shot down a couple of ME-109s in the air.
The rocket plane was an experimental.
Yeah. They had one experimental airplane that I found, but that's later on. After the war was over, they sent me down to first in Phillip, where I set up a little group, and our job was to go around and examine all the enemy airplanes and stuff that might be of interest. And I found a German airplane that had a prop in the front and a prop in the back. How in the hell do you bail out?
You don't?
I don't know. But I did have a funny experience. We got word that there was some stuff in barrels at a church the military would be very interested in. Well, we went over there and the priest just raised hell with us. He told us, you can't come in, this is a holy place and all that. We went in and we found, and I think it was probably something having to do with their development of a better weapon system later on. But we turned that over to Wright Patterson.
So at the end of the war, you sort of became an intelligence person.
Well, when the war ended, war in Europe ended, I volunteered to go to the Pacific. And I was in Camp Lucky Strike when the Pacific War ended. Instead, they sent me back home. And I went to Florida, Dale Mabry down there. And no, it wasn't Dale Mabry, I can't remember the name of the base, but I got out because I didn't want to be in as a reserve officer. It was my experience watching my father that the reserve officers stayed in 2 years and they were out. I got out and applied for a regular commission when I got out, and I went back to school at the University of Alabama. I was there a short time and I got notified that I'd been nominated for a regular commission and turned around and came back. Well, then they sent me to Bergstrom Air Force Base. It was a troop carrier outfit. And I went in and they assigned me to a squadron. I went and met my squadron commander and he said, I see you're a fighter pilot. I said, yes, sir. And he said, I want to get one thing said. I can't stand fighter pilots. I said, well, since you're clearing the air, I don't like troop carrier. One shortly thereafter, they sent me to chemical warfare school, where I spent 5 months studying chemical warfare, and then came back to the troop carrier outfit and taught chemical warfare. And what do you know? The wing commander, or the wing commander, then comes in, and he apologized for me having to teach chemical warfare to the troops. So the whole effect of it was nothing. Well, a few weeks later, I got a call from a personnel officer that said, I've got orders to send a fighter pilot to Europe. And I picked your name. I said, what's your favorite drink? So from there, I went to Europe.
What year was that?
Oh, I think that was 1954.
Yeah, but back to World War II, how many missions did you end up flying total?
Total missions 350.
350?
World War II was 150.
150 in World War II. What, that was Pretty high number, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, 100 was a pretty good number.
Well, you must have felt lucky.
Yeah, I was lucky.
And you were shot down twice during World War II.
Yeah. Yeah, twice.
Okay.
I told you about the
Right.
general meeting.
Right, right. Okay, the war ends, and then you're sort of out, and then you're back in, and there's a little diversion there that you're talking about, and then, but all of this is taking up several years, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, I got sent to the Philippines at one period of time.
after the war,
Yeah.
after the World War II, right?
And I had a squadron there, worked my way up to a squadron commander there. Well, actually, I got sent to Japan first. And they treated me, I was sent to a fighter group, and they treated me like I'd never been in a fighter. And they gave me a job as a tech inspector. And a bunch of the pilots in the Philippines had an accident. They ran into a mountain, and they were looking for replacements, so they asked for volunteers. And me and a guy named Scrappy Johnson, I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's written a book. We went to the Philippines.
What year, when you were in Japan, that was during Reconstruction, if you will.
Yeah, it was.
What was your take on Japan after the war?
Well, Japan was a nice place then, really was. And General MacArthur lived in downtown Tokyo, and the Japanese thought he was God. I mean, he'd come out, they would just all bow. All the traffic in the routes from here to his quarters would stop, and the people would line up the highway and bow to him. It was unbelievable.
Did you ever meet him?
Meet?
MacArthur?
No.
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 Okay. And so you were in Japan for
Maybe 3 or 4 months.
okay, before you went to the Philippines.
Yeah.
And then you're flying again.
Well, yeah, and when I went to Philippines, I flew a P-51 down there and left it with them, and I was met by the squadron commander, and he crawled up on a wing and greeted me to his squadron. He said, "I'm glad to have you." He said, "You're going to be in charge of my A flight, and when you leave, you'll be my operations officer. When my operations officer leaves, you'll take over operations." Well, he kept his word. It was nice to be welcome to the place.
And this was a management role, if you will.
Yeah, and then they had a squadron commander that wouldn't fly. He'd get his flying time in other airplanes, but he wouldn't fly the P-51. So the group commander called me, or the squadron commander called me in. No, the group commander called me and said, "McGowan is going on vacation for a month. I want you to run the squadron." Okay, so I ran the squadron. After a month, he called me and said, "You got it." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You're the squadron commander." I was only a captain at that time. Probably the only captain in the Air Force that had a squadron.
Squadron commanders are usually majors or colonels?
Lieutenant colonel.
Lieutenant colonels.
And then we converted to F-80s, and then the war in Korea started.
The F-80 is a jet?
Yeah.
Was that, you had to learn to fly it, right?
Yeah, but it's an easy airplane to fly.
Okay.
A lot easier than a P-51. There's no torque involved. But then when we went, they called for volunteers to go to the war in Korea, and I volunteered. They made me charge of an outfit called the Dallas Project, which went up into Korea and later became the 12th Squadron, which was the squadron I had in the Philippines.
Tell me about Korea. What was that like?
It's pretty rough. It really was. We went into a place called Daegu, and we had been there, and the 51s we got had been in mothballs, and they didn't run very well. But our maintenance people got on them and did pretty well with them. I had a mission out of Daegu, which we got a frag, which is an order to fly the airplane, that the Army had left 17 boxcars of ammunition in Daejeon. And by all means, we were supposed to destroy them. Well, the weather was down to the deck almost, and we're living in a valley. And we sent out 8 airplanes, 2 airplanes each. And I took out 2, and we managed to get through the valley, climbed up, flew time and distance, and let down, and there we approached the track, and we destroyed them all. Then we turned around and came back. We couldn't get back. We had to climb up over the clouds and come back. Now what do? We did time and distance, and we had no navigation aids, nobody to help us down. And we flew time and distance to the Japanese Sea of Japan, between Korea and Japan. But just as we were flying over, when my time ran out to be over the airfield, I looked down and there was a break in the clouds, and there was the airfield. We spun down and landed.
So you just back measured what you did going out?
Yeah. But you didn't know what the wind was or anything, it was just pure luck.
Were you ever confronted with other what were the dangers in Korea? I mean, flak or
Flak,
other airplanes?
yeah.
Did you see any other?
No, never saw another airplane.
Okay. And how long were you in Korea?
I was there about 8 months.
Mm-hmm. And how many missions did you fly?
127.
And this was in what was the plane you were flying?
51.
Oh, you were back in the old 51s.
Yeah.
They were 10 years old at that point, right?
And the difference between a 51, did I talk about this earlier? The 51 and the 47?
Do it again.
Okay. The P-47 is an air-cooled engine.
Mm-hmm.
The 51 is a liquid-cooled engine.
Mm-hmm.
Any hit in the fuselage of the 51, you go down.
Because you lose your coolant.
I think I did mention it. I got hit 6 times and got shot down twice. Got hit 30 times, got shot down twice. So why they did away with the P-47 now? In the 47, we had 8 machine guns, 4,000 rounds of ammunition. 51 had, and carried 2 1,000-pound bombs. 51 had 6 machine guns, 1,800 rounds of ammunition. Now tell me which is the best.
And it had an air-cooled engine.
Yeah. Now I had another mission in Korea where our forces had got up almost to the Yalu
Mm-hmm.
River, and then the Japanese came in. I mean, the Chinese came in, and they were retreating back, and they were in a valley, and the Chinese had a high ground, was strafing and shooting the heck out of them, and they had the roadblock. So I was coming back, we still had napalm, and we dropped 8 tank at a time in order to spread it out so the guys would have a chance to get back. And then strafed them, and in the meantime, we called for war help. Well, they did get back.
And visually, you could see the difference when the Chinese came in from the air?
No.
No, couldn't.
No, they were well camouflaged.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, we were flying out of Pyongyang, which is the capital of North Korea. And we had to get out of there because it came down that far. I flew an airplane out that was, class 26, I think they call it.
Mm-hmm.
It was unflyable. It was that or go out on a train, and I chose to take my chance with the airplane.
What were the living conditions like in Korea?
Grim.
When you got back to base?
We we lived in tents.
Mm-hmm.
When we're in Pyongyang, the temperature is down to 0. You live in a tent when it's 0 and it's cold. And I remember one day a lieutenant came in and said, the enemy is just a few miles out. So we all opened up all our spare food and ate it up, and that's when we got back out of there.
Did you fly out or you flew out?
I flew the bad airplane out, yeah.
Right. And when you say bad, it was a clunker?
Yeah.
Where did you fly to?
Suwon,
South.
south.
And they overran the base?
Yeah, they came back.
Mm-hmm. What year did you? The war was still going on when you after your tour.
Oh yeah, yeah. It went on quite a while after I left.
Mm-hmm. Were you ever shot down in Korea?
Twice.
Twice.
Yeah.
And what was from flak?
I was strafing one day and got hit in the engine, and I turned around and you can tell when you hit the engine because all this fluid is coming out. And I headed back to the home base. So it's about 50 miles away, I'd say. And there was a river called the Naktong River, which was really the bomb line, which meant the enemy's on one side and we're on the other. And I was trying to get to the friendly side and I couldn't make it. And I had to ditch the airplane in the middle of the river. Well, the -1, which the pilot's manual says, never ditch this airplane. Why? The 51 has a scoop underneath. When it hits, the airplane breaks in two, right at the pilot's cockpit. So I remember the -1, and it said, if you have to ditch it under any conditions, throw the wing in the water. Well, I did, and the airplane spun around like that. So I crawled out of the airplane and ran the friendly side of the beach. Next thing you know, I'm surrounded by about 200 Koreans. And they just formed a circle around me. And they just, as I'd move toward them, they'd move away from me, and just like that. They sent I always flew with a package of cigarettes. So I ripped my bags and pulled the cigarettes out. And my wingman almost strafed them. He thought they were gonna tear me apart. But I waved to him and they let me go. They all took not all, I didn't have that many cigarettes. They took a cigarette, put it in their mouth, and just stood there looking at me. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. Got a clue?
No, what?
Took one out of their mouth, put it in mine, lighted it up, handed it back to them. And then they all lit up. And they formed a line, and they all came and tapped me on the head and said, Arigato, Arigato, which means thank you.
Now, the other time you were shot down, what was that one?
Okay, the enemy then, we were all pushed down and called a perimeter. And the enemy was just on the other side of the mountain. We were on this side. And they had some experimental rockets they wanted us to use and wanted only the pilots that had the best reputation for hitting something. So I got a chance to try it and caught a tank on the other side of the mountain and nailed him, and he nailed me. But I managed to get over the mountain before the engine quit and landed, dead sticked it on my airfield.
P-51 again.
P-51 again.
You didn't really like the P-51.
For a fun flying airplane, I couldn't ask for a better one. But for trying to save your life and fight a war, No, it was a lot of fun to fly, very maneuverable and all that. 47, you learn what your airplane does best. Now, 47 could roll faster than a 51. It could dive faster than the 51 because it's a big, heavy airplane. So if somebody got on your tail, like that, well, 51's like that.
Okay, so your time's up in Korea. You've been shot down twice. And then, but at this point, you're still a captain?
I made major.
Made major.
And when I left Korea, they took it away from me.
Really?
Yeah, it was a spot promotion.
Okay, that was common?
Yeah, but when the first major's list came out, I was on it. The first lieutenant colonel's mission, I was on it.
So you leave Korea, and what's next?
I went to Shaw Air Force Base and flew F-84s.
Sabre? Was
No.
that the Sabre?
No, Sabre's F-86.
Okay.
Like Thunderbolt.
Thunder.
Yeah.
And what'd you think of that plane?
It's a nice airplane.
And you're in the States
Yeah,
training, or?
yeah. And I'm just trying to get my story straight. Oh, I was in that outfit for a while. Oh, they sent me to Squadron Officer School. That's where you learn to be a squadron commander.
Mm-hmm.
And they really wanted me down there because they wanted to talk to me about my experiences. And after that, I came back and I commanded another squadron. And we took it down to Eglin Air Force Base, where we practiced delivering atomic weapons.
When you say practice, you mean so that you could deliver in a war, a real atomic weapon?
And I was there for a couple of months, and we got ahead of our schedule. And so I decided to put on an air show for the troops.
Mm-hmm.
And we took them out where we bombed, and we came back and did some rolls in formation. And I got a radio call, told me to cease and desist. When the group commander, or the base commander, wanted to talk to me. Well, we had caught, not we, but it had been reported to me that he was stealing food out of the mess hall, or out of the hospital. And I said, don't come see me, you go see, and I told him where to go. He thought I had turned him in, I didn't, but he reported me for doing acrobatics without his permission over his airfield, and I got relief. And I was told to report to TAC headquarters, which I did. I met General Barkas, and he said, Barkas had a reputation being a tough old man. He called me in and asked me to tell my story. He said, I believe you. He said, but I'm going to make you a flying safety officer for the headquarters for fighters. And 1 year from now, you'll get a squadron again. Well, in the meantime, he gets transferred.
The
And
guy.
I thought, oh my God. But when a year was up, his replacement called in and said, I've got a note from General Barkas. Said, get you out of here and get you a squadron. Well, they weren't going to give me a squadron in England Air Force Base. But my old group commander was head of requirements at headquarters. He said, I got a job for you. I want you to evaluate it, and if you like it, write up your own job description. And I want you to be the tech rep at Eglin Air Force Base, and I want you to participate in all the experimental things that are going on down there and keep us informed. I took that job and got it.
This was 50s, in the 50s?
Yeah, right.
What kind of things were new then?
F-86 was pretty new. Mm-hmm. F-101 was brand new. The Gatling gun was brand new. There were a lot of different things going on. Mm-hmm. They started training to fly combat at night, and I participated in that.
You're still flying?
Yeah, it's a good job. Then from there, I got sent to England. That was probably the most fun tour I ever had in my life. It was a hard job, though. We had to keep 2 airplanes on 15-minute alert with atomic weapons on them, year-round.
They had real atomic weapons?
Real atomic weapons. But they're safe. I mean, it took 2 people to unlock them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And one was in this group, one was in this group. They didn't communicate together. But it kind of restricts what you can do when you have to keep those 2 airplanes. The rest of us were on an hour alert. And they would have what they call TAC evals. I ended up being a TAC eval header at one time. And they, a unit would come in at night, unbeknownst to anybody, and declare war. And then create problems on the base to see how well you can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on. But I got many English friends. And we did all sorts of things together.
How long were you in England?
I was there 4 years and then came back to War College, Pentagon, back to England again for 3 more years.
So you spent 7 years in England.
7 years in England.
Now, let me go back to the atomic, these atomic bombs that were, are they mounted on the aircraft in this 15-minute ready?
Yes, sir.
And if you had a target, it would have been the old Soviet Union?
No, not, we didn't get that far. It would be mostly in East Germany.
Mm-hmm. And these were tactical nukes?
Yeah.
Not big ones, but
they're big.
They're big. What'd they weigh?
Pardon me?
How much did they weigh?
I'd say a couple of 1,000 pounds.
Really?
Yeah.
And so you have to be ready to go in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Our pilots slept under the airplanes.
What'd you think about that? I mean,
boy, I didn't give it much thought.
Just hope the call didn't come.
Well, it almost came when the Russians invaded. Was it Czechoslovakia?
Mm-hmm.
Where I was in high altitude training, and first in Felbrook, and I got a call to come back to the base immediately. Well, all of Europe was sucked in there. And I told him it's below minimum. He said, if you think you can make it, come. So there were 3 of us. We all took off. We came back and we landed on GCA units, brought us in, and we landed safely.
Yeah, you're flying with a nuclear bomb.
No.
Oh, no, okay.
Those nuclear bomb airplanes never took off.
Never?
Never.
No, okay.
Now they'd have a dummy, another airplane would take off like it had a nuclear bomb.
Right.
They were never unlocked. You know,
Right. But there was a lot of tension around the Czechoslovakian.
Yeah.
Did you ever, was that the time of the greatest tension?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're in England for 3 years. You're
4 years.
For the first time.
Yeah.
For 4 years. And was your job there the whole time with these ready go nuclear weapons?
When I got to England, I was assigned as a squadron commander. And after I'd been there a week, one of the guys had a wreck. And the group commander called me in and said, you just got here. I'm not going to get on your case, but you make sure that outfit is ready to go. So I went back and we started a policy that the pilots would take weekend cross countries and visit different bases all over Europe and see how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd come back and we'd have a talk, a briefing, and they'd get up and explain it. We'd talk about it. If we liked it, we'd try it. If we didn't like it, we'd go back. Well, it worked. And about a year later, we got awarded as having the best squadron in Europe. So and we didn't have to have an original idea. So what could you ask for better than that?
You went and stole the best ideas.
Yeah, and the guys were great, really. They worked hard.
They probably enjoyed the weekends too.
Yeah, we did.
The other folks. You went too.
Well, we had a lot of English friends. We went to 15 going away parties thrown by our English friends before we left the first time. One of them was his name was Stanley Pearson. He was a underwriter of Lloyd's of London. And he had a contract with Lloyd's to get a new Rolls Royce every year for £1,000. That's $2,800. Rolls tried to break the contract, and the courts wouldn't let him.
Really?
Yeah.
So you leave England after this tour, and then before you went back to England, what was next?
War College.
And that was at Maxwell?
Yeah.
Okay. And you were there for a year?
Yeah.
What'd you think of War College?
It was a fun place to be. We went to school in the morning, played golf, and enjoyed it.
Did you live on base?
Yeah. And then from there, they sent me to Washington, and they wanted me a legislative liaison officer with the Congress. And I said, I think you got the wrong man. I said, I don't have much regard for a lot of the congressmen. You got the wrong man. So I went to operations in the Pentagon.
Uh-huh.
And I spent, I think it was 4 years there.
You lived in Virginia, or?
Yeah. Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
That was a task too. I worked on a study for 3 months, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, except on Sunday. It was a half a day on Sunday. I felt like a vegetable when I got out.
Bureaucratic.
And what the study was, should the Army get their own fighter airplanes or the Air Force? That's when the Army went to helicopters.
Mm-hmm. So this study actually moved the airplane resources to the Air Force.
Yeah.
It must have been a fight.
I wouldn't. We were given the conclusion. We were told to prove it.
That was your job to prove it.
And from there, I was on leave down in the Perdido. My sister had a house down there, and I got a call from the Pentagon, said, we need you to come back and explain this. And I said, hey, I don't work for you anymore. I'm on my way to Europe.
So okay, you leave there. What's the time frame here? What year is this now? This 60s? For your second tour?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, but that was really a momentous decision to. The Army's only going to have fixed wing, and I mean, you could look at the military today and see that.
Yeah.
If the Army had held on to aircraft, that would have been important. So you leave the States and you go back to England, and what's your job there?
Same job.
Same job.
Same job. Went back to same squadron.
For 3 more years?
Yep. No, I was there a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got promoted.
To
Colonel.
Full colonel.
And, pardon me?
Lieutenant colonel, full colonel.
Full colonel.
Full colonel.
And then they made me in charge of Takaval at the 3rd Air Force headquarters in London.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a year down there.
Mm-hmm. So then you've done your time in Europe for the second time, and in England, your second tour. What's next?
Vietnam. Yeah.
And so things were full boil or heating up?
They were full boil.
Full boil.
My job was director of plans at headquarters. And what my job is to schedule the in-country fighter units each day.
What they're going to do?
Yeah.
How many fighter units?
There were about 5 or 6, I can't remember exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it a point to fly with all of them, because it had been my experience a lot of times that people in headquarters didn't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I made myself known to each one and flew with each one.
What were you flying?
I flew F-4s, F-100s, N-156, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm. And so your job is to figure out the day's activities and what needs to be done for all military aircraft in theater, in country, right?
Not out of country,
right? But in Vietnam,
yeah.
And so, how does that work? The intelligence comes up to you and they say, "We've got some hot spot here or a hot spot there."
Usually they come up and the unit's intelligence submits their requirements and we fill the requirements.
Mm-hmm. And how many aircraft under your command?
I'd say 300, roughly.
What were the days? I mean, what kinds of things were you going after? Supply lines or?
Mainly supporting the troops, bombing the strafing the enemy that was in front of them. We would hit supply lines, and I tried like mad to get them to form a group, but they didn't do it. I wanted to. You'd have a FAC, you'd have an illuminator. This is night, and you'd have a fighter unit. I wanted to put them all on one unit and have them cover this area, period. And they'd get damn good at it. But instead, they just spread it all around. And take an example. The enemy had to use these mountain trails to get the supplies in. If I flew over that every night, I'd know it hand in back of my hand.
Right.
And I would schedule where we're going to attack them. And we would have, this is point A, point B, point C. And we'd catch them on the part of that mountain that they had no place to go. And the illuminator would come over and illuminate. And the airplanes would go down and destroy them.
Sort of like zone coverage in football.
Yeah.
So you kept floating the idea, and so a general kept saying no.
We used to have, we'd have to have a morning briefing with the general every day. And some of the people would intentionally make a small mistake. So he could point it out. You can't do that, and then they'd be calm.
Why was that?
I don't know. I used to play tennis there with a guy named Westmoreland. And I had dinner with Westmoreland and Bob Hope there.
Really?
Yeah.
How long were you in Vietnam?
With who?
How long were you in Vietnam?
A year.
And how'd you feel about Vietnam? I mean,
I thought it stunk. There was a lot of in-country enemy in Vietnam. And there were areas where we weren't allowed to go in Vietnam. So the enemy would stack up there in those areas, and we couldn't go in there.
And why was that?
I think something dirty in Denmark. That's all I can think.
You just sort of said these are the orders, right?
Yeah.
But you wanted to send your aircraft in, but you couldn't.
Sure, yeah.
But they would say,
no, that's right.
Huh. That's interesting. Did you ever come up with a theory? No.
One of the big jobs we had is keeping caisson liberated. I don't know if you're familiar with caisson, but we had a group of troops on this mountaintop, and they were completely surrounded by enemy. And we were in there all the time, bombing, strafing.
What kind of bombs?
500-pound bombs.
And napalm as well?
Yeah, napalm. All of that. They didn't like napalms, the enemy, but they were right up to the border of that mountain.
Did you have the equipment that you needed and wanted?
I think so.
Okay, that was not an issue.
No.
Okay. Okay, so you've done your year in Vietnam, and so
They sent me to Holloman Air Force Base.
And where's that?
New Mexico. And I was the operations officer of the 49th Fighter Wing, became vice commander, became wing commander.
How was that?
That was fine. I had a problem there though. The chief of staff's son got killed, who was flying in my outfit on a weekend cross country, and I got relieved from my command because of that.
How did he get killed?
Huh?
How did he die? In his airplane?
He'd been out partying all night on a weekend cross country, and he took a friend of mine with him.
You really have to be owned to fly, right?
Yeah. Well, my outfit, the 49th, won the McKay Trophy that year. And after I had been relieved, they couldn't find a job for me in the Air Force hardly. So they sent me to WESIC, Weapons Systems Evaluation Group. And we were a think tank that thought out of new techniques and weapons. And they awarded the McKay Trophy to the wing commander in Washington. And they called me and asked me to come over. Well, I got there, and the aide said, "You're not welcome in close."
Wow, that must have hurt.
Yeah, it was quite a shock.
Yeah. This was because of this commander.
Yeah.
He's still mad.
Huh?
He's still angry at you about his son.
Oh, yeah.
So this.
What's amazing, his other son is head of the Air Force, was head of the Air Force later on.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're sent to evaluate weapons. Where is that? Back in Washington?
Yeah.
And
We worked with a group called IDA. That's a bunch of civilian professors that were in on it. And we came up with new weapon systems. It's amazing because what you see now is a second step past what we recommended.
what was the most important thing to come out of that in terms of weapon systems?
I would say the weapons that were steered by radar or something in the airplane.
The
target.
Precision.
Yeah, drop and leave, you know.
Right, precision weapons.
Yeah.
And that came out during that period of time
Yeah.
you were there.
Right.
What'd you think when you heard about precision weapons?
I thought it was a great relief.
Yeah. It sort of was a sledgehammer approach prior to that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, what you can do, and it's not, you can lock on a target, launch your weapon, and head out. The weapon follows the target right on in. And they made that a great thing. But what they don't say is another weapon system over here shooting at you, and another one over here shooting at you. But it's a better technique, though.
so you were at this evaluation center for how long?
About 2 years.
Okay. And then what was next?
Retirement.
Retirement. Okay. All right. I'm going to wrap this up, but a lot of experience. What was the most important part of your military career?
I can't say.
Okay.
I am not bitter over being relieved. I just took that as part of down the path. I enjoyed my military service very much. I had many, many friends. I still have many, many friends that are still alive.
Harry, I want to thank you for this interview. You're an extraordinary man that I remember your stories from 25 years ago and have repeated them, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'll tell you another story, just as a matter of interest.
Yeah.
I was flying 51s out of Korea, and we're coming back, and I saw these tracks moving into a haystack. Well, that didn't make sense, so we went down and started strafing it. It was a tank. Well, you can't destroy tanks with strafing bullets, but the hay caught on fire.
It burned the tank up.
Burned the tank up.
That's right. That's wonderful. What a great interview.
Harry, have you written a book?
I'm working on a few stories for my grandchildren, for my
You know,
children.
I've never seen a person, I mean, he's had more, like he's three people with the
Right.
different wars and everything. that
I'm
he's
sorry
been
I
in.
said anything about that general.
No, you know
No.
what? You know what? I think what you touched on in this, and there were, every career has, and you crossed up into bureaucracy, and that's what a lot of people don't think about. The military is a bureaucracy, and it's got power people that will, for their own reasons, will try to do you in, and
Well, I'll tell you one other story, which is not on. When I was in Wessing, I worked for General Ascani.
Mhm.
He called me into his office and said, I want to show you something. It was an ER, effectiveness report.
Mhm.
Oh, it was the most damning thing you ever saw.
yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, Harry, I wanted you to see this, but I'm about to retire. They can't do anything to me.
Right,
He
right.
wrote most outstanding officer I ever met on it.
And I'm sure that was true.
That's great.
Harry,
That's
did you ever get shot down in Vietnam?
No.
You were an administrator for the most part in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But you were flying all those
Yeah,
missions.
but he
too.
flew.
Yeah,
He did
I flew
fly with us.
85 missions in Vietnam.
Yeah.
How you doing there?
How are you?
Good.
Did you watch this?
Oh, yeah, I've been
Yes,
here.
I didn't know you were here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I flew 85.
I kept my mouth shut.
believe it or not.
No, but you know what? And I think what you hit on there too is in any job, the management gets pulled back, and that thing about going and flying with the troops says,
Yeah.
well,
Well,
I understand what you do.
I have a theory too. Always treat people like you'd like to have them treat you, and you won't have a problem.